Hello, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
Because I've been playing football, because I had to rush off after the film, I've got a bit of a cold coming on. It's been a chilly evening. So if I'm coughing a little bit, spluttering, it's because of that.
All right. Thank you for sharing that.
That's what I just,
Okay, are you ready to begin?
Oh no, ask me how the match went.
Okay, how did the match go?
I don't want to talk about
it. All right. Shall we begin?
Yes.
So, we've just come back from seeing Zed in a cinema. It's a 2014 restoration. And so, Mike, what did you think of it?
Had you seen it before?
I had not seen it before.
Nor had I, obviously. I knew nothing about it. I was thrilled to find out it was in colour.
Really?
Well, I mean, I guess literally the only... Because, you know, we never like to know things before we see films, if we can help it. And so all I knew was that I looked up the film briefly just to find out what year it was. And I saw the poster was in black and white. And then I just assumed, well, it's a black and white film.
Yes.
Which is dumb, but, you know, whatever. But it's in colour.
I actually knew quite a bit about it, in the sense that, you know, it's one of those films that I've been meaning to see for years. And in fact, just in the summer, I was really interested in Yves Montand, the French star. And so, you know, I bought the film meaning to see it and so on. It's just one of those things that, you know, I've never gotten around to it.
Yeah.
But you know, I have heard, I remember reading Pauline Kael's review on it, and, you know, so there's all this kind of vague information that you have on it without actually having seen it, really. So that was how I came into the film.
Funnily enough, we'll get onto what the film is about in a minute, but and as normal, we'll be talking spoilers, but this is a film from 1969, so can we get your act together?
And it's based on historical events.
Yes. Funnily enough, when I was watching it, I thought a lot of these people looked really familiar, which was bizarre because these are French actors from the 60s and 70s, so there was no it's not really a type and era, you know, of film that I'm hugely familiar with. I thought maybe a lot of them had been in The Day of the Jackal, possibly.
Could be.
I don't know, because I have seen that, and obviously that's set in France. But I don't know. But there were certain shots almost that I actually thought I really recognised some of it. Like, I don't know if it's obviously a big film, right? It's one of the few films that was nominated for Best Picture and Best Foreign Picture at the Academy Awards.
Yes.
Won, just every award going.
It was a huge popular success in France, and surprisingly in America, where I think, you know, if it wasn't the top 10, it was around there. Yeah, it was one of the most popular films of the year in America.
So critically and sort of popularly successful.
Yes.
So I guess like it must have seeped in to kind of the consciousness somewhere.
Yes.
Because it felt familiar to me in some ways, though I didn't know the plot and I didn't know anything about it.
Yes.
So that was an interesting experience. Anyway, maybe I did recognise parts, maybe I didn't. Maybe it's just a style of that kind of filmmaking that seems similar. I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
It's so engrossing. It's a properly gripping political thriller, basically.
Yes.
But not like overdone. It's not like, you know, spying and people running about. It's about a single event and then the investigation into what happened and people spinning their stories about it.
Yes. So basically, the plot in a nutshell is that this doctor, played by Yves Montand, is the leader of the opposition. He goes to give a speech that's against nuclear disarmament, and you realize quickly that the police is doing everything to prevent this being a safe event.
The police is run by the military, more or less.
Yes.
Everyone involved, everyone at the top is a colonel. They've all got uniforms and the medals.
That's right. So they have a stake in having an incident happen. In the meantime, someone's heard that the speaker might be assassinated. The speaker is so used to these warnings that he ignores them. The only place that they find for him to speak is in this hall that's opposite his hotel, and that They get around it by putting speakers outside so that they can address the huge audience they're expecting. So one of the ways that this film has such tension is that really all that's involved is getting this man safely across the street, right? And what ends up happening is that he doesn't get there safely. He gets beaten, and actually he doesn't only gets beaten, he ends up being killed. So the whole film becomes a police procedural. Yeah, that's kind of, it's Jean-Louis Trintignant, who we just saw the other day in Haneke's film.
Happy End.
And Happy End. Here is, as a very young...
Well, it's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
More hair, fewer wrinkles.
Yes. Looking very serious and handsome. Anyway, he's the one who leads the investigation. And, the more he talks to people, the more he uncovers. Until, at the very end of the film, he accuses all of the major colonels and police people, who are involved in really a plot that ended up in the death of this national figure. So, and the title comes from, the letter Z in Greek, which means he's alive or something, like he lives.
Yeah, I was just looking this up because I didn't know this before.
I didn't know, but it's the last title in the film.
Well, I didn't know it was based on historical events.
Ah, right, okay.
I'll just give you the Wikipedia summation. The film, it's based on a novel, and the film presents a thinly fictionalized account of the events surrounding the assassination of democratic Greek politician Grigoris Lambrakis in 1963. The letter Z. The film's title refers to a popular Greek protest slogan, I think it's pronounced Z, meaning he lives, in reference to Lambrakis.
Yes, and unlike most thrillers, which have like a satisfying kind of resolution, or a crime is prevented or a crime is uncovered, this one, what happens is the crime is uncovered, and then there's a coda telling you what really happened with all of the major figures. And really, kind of what really happened is, the colonels all got scot-free. The people who did the murder got a minimal sentence. And then all of, the very good, doctors and lawyers and journalists, who accompanied the Yves Montand figure, 7 of them were killed, in various ways.
They're ruled as suicides and no foul play, but they're all... car crashes and drownings. And,
exactly, right.
Political assassinations.
And
then the military seizes power and starts banning art and...
So then, because this is nationally seen, as such a contravention of democratic principles and, justice, the military is afraid, or the conservatives are afraid of losing the next election. So basically what happens is, that the military takes over. And this is actually what's referred to in this period of Greek history is, it's the rule of the colonels, I think it's called, right? Where, the military junta run by colonels really takes on the government of the body of Greece. And you have all of these people like Melina Mercouri and so on who go into exile as a result. And I imagine that, as part of this protest is why we see Irene Papas, for example, playing, the role of Yves Montand's wife. Yeah. So that's the plot.
Tell me about her.
In a nutshell. Oh, Irene, well, she's a great Greek star. Irene Papas, I mean, maybe most famous, for being in Zorba the Greek. But, she was, I think, in the Guns of Navarone and so on. Along with Melina Mercouri, she's the only... Melina Mercouri and Irene Papas are the only actors in the post-war period in Greece that acquired an international reputation. They're the 2 biggest stars of Greek cinema, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. So...
the most terrifying... It's not really a terrifying film, but then the ending is incredibly terrifying because it's all about, everything basically has gone well, right? This is a film with a happy ending. He's indicted all the people in charge for the crime. He's uncovered it. He's listened to all the stories and he's got it right. He solved the case, if you like. And then the military just seizes power. None of that matters. They just take over.
That's right.
And the most terrifying thing is right at the end, which I don't know if it's a slight mistranslation or not. But I think the subtitle, because I don't speak French, believe it or not, not very good. I get every 20th word. You know, like when, I think someone every now and again the subtitles of their word that I knew I was going to recognise. They say dog, and then I'd hear the word Shan and I go, I know French. But right at the end, it says they banned the letter Z.
Yes.
Which I don't know if it's in the French, it's more the use of the term Z, or if it's the letter Z. But banning the letter Z, as the subtitle suggested, is far more scary.
Yes.
It's scary banning a term anyway, but it reminds me of this novel called Ella Minnow P, which is a girl's name, by this writer Mark Dunn. It's a novel about a totalitarian government that starts banning the use of letters because a hero of theirs invented the phrase "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," and as letters start falling off the statue of this bloke, they're like, "Well, it must be a sign." And the novel is written in letters going back and forth, correspondences, and the government is reading them all. So as the novel goes on and more letters fall off this statue, there are fewer letters available to the writers to use. It's a really funny, it's a brilliant little novel. I suggest you read it. Anyway, so we were talking about the very ending of the film, where it's scary. It takes a turn. I think it's important. It's it's clearly making a point, isn't it? That change in tone. It's basically the film is kind of on this rise, you know, in kind of mood.
Yes.
You're going with it. You're like, yes, they're going to get taken down. Jean-Louis Trintignant is going to get them.
Yes.
And then, oh no, they took over and killed everybody.
Right. And in fact, what the ending does, so there's this whole coda at the end saying all of the things that had been banned. So, you know, modern music, long hair, mathematics, you know, the attribute, the saying that Socrates was homosexual. So there's this long list, you know, from entire branches of science to really specific things that this military junta now bans, right? So, you know, whereas the structure of the film is like this thriller where everything actually, this procedural thriller where everything gets resolved, at the end that's cut out from under you, you know, and in fact, the problems are not only not resolved, but they could become exacerbated, right?
I think the letter Z as well, the final thing, literally the final thing the film shows you and tells you is the letter Z has been banned, and it shows up a huge letter Z on screen as the credits then roll, and it ends the film so because it's the last letter of the alphabet. It's not just, I mean, it's great that it's a reference to this Greek saying, but it's the last letter of the alphabet.
Yes.
And it ends. It's like saying this is the end. There's nothing to come after this. It feels really definitive, and quite scary.
Yes. Let me tell you all the things that I loved. Okay. So I loved Yves Montand. Right, from the moment that he gets off the airplane at the beginning of the film, you see somebody like really handsome, charismatic, authoritative. Right, it's kind of like a wonderful cameo performance in a way, right? Because, you know, it seems like for about a third of the film, you think that the film is about him, and really, kind of for most of the film, it ends up being Jean-Louis Trintignant, who's marvelous, you know, being I don't know, the magistrate who leads this inquest.
He's a judge.
Okay, he's a judge.
That's the word the subtitles use.
Okay, so
I'll always be relying on the subtitles to help me out with these things.
The judge who leads the inquest. So, you know, I love both of them. I love the way the film's pace, right? It is paced as a thriller. It's exciting to watch. I loved that it's so humorous. Yeah,
yes.
Kind of. You know, the film finds not only excitement, you know, but humor in this really absurd political situation. The other thing I loved is the way that the film is very kind and wise about its minor characters, right? So, you know, these thugs and killers and so on, right? Like, they're rounded, they're giving backstories and family, they're humanized, right? They're not just some kind of abstract, kind of no-name figure that can be bumped off. So I loved all of those aspects of the film, actually.
Actually, thinking about those minor characters, now you mention it, they kind of have a sort of Poirot feeling to them. The idea that, I mean, obviously you know what happens. It's not a mystery. You know what happens. You've seen it happen, and it's how it's going to pan out. But investigating these people and listening to their stories and seeing them interact, it builds this kind of tapestry where it's not just about kind of what you did and your whereabouts on the evening last, but it's about what informs them to do what they do.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
So they're not shown to be evil characters. I mean, they're shown to be kind of ordinary people who have certain circumstances, really. That's all, really. So, they get caught up in, this somebody else's game for reasons that are often banal. Having birds that make noise and needing a permit, or fearing losing a job, or
there's a lot to do with money.
Yeah,
you very often hear them talking to each other about one of them wants to keep up the payments on his car, the other one gets tomatoes when they're out of season, he steals one because they're so expensive.
Yes,
they're always talking about money.
So this leads me to the thing that I like least about the film.
Okay,
which I thought it was absolutely, completely typical of the left-wing films of its day in its dissemination of homophobia, right? So you can argue that having like the sleaziest killer of them all as a gay guy, that the biggest sleaziest thug in the whole film,
quite a predatory gay guy.
Yeah, to make him not only gay but a child molester, in fact, right, is really uncalled for. Now,
you're talking about the bit where he tries to pick up the guy at the pinball.
But not only that, so, first you see a young boy in his underwear in the balcony, then he tries to pick up the guy in the pinball, but then you also find out from his police history, that he had raped a young boy in the Scouts.
That's right.
Right, in the Boy Scouts. I just thought that was like too much and uncalled for, and particularly at a time, when the representation of any gay people at all, it was so few, there was such a dearth of representation. People were starved for representation, and to have gay people represented like this, I thought was uncalled for. Now,
I noticed that as well, I must say.
Yeah. So, you could make an argument, but it was historically accurate. The guy who did do this was like that, but actually, kind of, I don't think there was any need to show it as that. And actually, it's kind of, oppressing gay people, oppressing a minority, disempowered, disenfranchised, population by kind of, making the villain in this particular way. And I think actually that's one of the things that to me prevents this film from being really great. It's kind of, has a model of action and of social change and so on, that is virile, right? That it's kind of, you have to be a man and a particular kind of action man to be a man of integrity and so on. And that implies you have to be a man and you have to be a heterosexual man, right? So it's a very particular, and as I said, very typical of left-wing ideals of that time, which were also kind of very homophobic. So,
I don't know as much about it as you, but I agree with you. I find that quite distasteful. I mean, the moment that you see him is when they're inciting a riot with a load of lefties who are trying to get into this hall. The hall's then the talk's been moved away, and the government, essentially some government agents, basically signal all these thugs to go and start the riot. And the gay guy is one of them, and the camera focuses on him while this riot is happening. He's there just taking it in and occasionally kicking someone and being quite aloof about it, and he's got a flowery shirt as well. And so I thought, is this so obvious? Like, or am I seeing this? And then it turns out no, he is gay. The film kind of confirms it a little bit later.
Yes.
So I thought I noticed this right away. This is so overt and, as you say, so unnecessary.
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't particularly familiar with the history of that being something that left-wing films or left-wing stories would do.
Yes.
But it was so clear.
Yes.
And making no point, really.
Well, it took a long time for the left.
The film would have been stronger without it.
Yes, it would have been stronger without it. Because actually, you could argue, that the guy who helps reveal the case, I think there's a sense in which he is also coded as gay.
Which one is that?
The one who got beaten over the head.
The football fan.
Yeah, football fan who ends up in the hospital, right?
Yeah.
To me, he's definitely coded as gay.
Okay.
Right? He's a middle-aged man who's clearly not married, who's taken over as head of the household, who who lives with his mother, and who's got this very cute kind of young man working, for him in his business, right? So, and he's got no children and blah, yeah, so kind of that would be a traditional set of characteristics that you could read as gay without making it explicit, which for me makes the other thing worse, right? So I don't know if the film is trying to balance it out, right? To make, this nice man who in a way is the key to unraveling the case, and the thug killer, right? I don't know if that's meant to like kind of, one make up for the other, whatever, but they're not equivalent because one is very, very explicit, and the other one is coded.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I mean, that kind of stuff has always been slightly, I don't know what the word would be, alien to me maybe, or just kind of not something that I hugely look for or am accustomed to seeing. The idea of things being coded.
Yes.
When someone explains it to me, it always becomes quite clear.
Yes. Well, I mean, kind of the thing is that it renders it a likelihood. It doesn't seal the case, which is, where coding comes in. Because, it's quite possible, for a middle-aged man who's unmarried, to be unmarried for all kinds of reasons. And, maybe he's got, like, this cute fey assistant, because he just needed somebody to get... Like, the thing about the coding is that you could always rationalize it away. That's why it's not explicit, it's coded. But when you have these whole set of characteristics, it lends to a particular interpretation, right? Yeah. It's too many characteristics together. So, anyway, I thought of that, but then you have like this child molester thug, into young boys who's really is like the person who commits the crime, right? Like it's just too much.
Yeah. He's essential kind of most overt villain.
Yes, and so, he is rendered explicitly.
It's funny what you said about the idea that it would be historically accurate, because I've no idea how deep the historical accuracy goes. But that has never seemed like a good argument to me. If you're telling a true story, this is obviously fictionalized, but let's say you're telling an absolutely true story, people will say, well, it's historically accurate. And they go, well, if it's problematic, then there's no good reason to keep it in for that reason, or you could change it for some reason. Like, that's never seemed to me to be a good defence. Well, it was historically accurate. You're still making choices about what you put in and leave out and change. You have to take responsibility for your story.
Exactly, right? Like, so, you could have been, if this thug was gay, hey, well, first of all, actually, it doesn't add anything to the story to say so, really. And secondly, it could have been done in all kinds of ways without kind of getting people creeped out at the idea of homosexuality, which is what the film does.
Well, so let's think about then. So, what you're getting at is, we agree that it adds nothing to the story. Why then did people portray homosexuals in this way, or choose to portray villains as homosexual?
Well,
pure homophobia.
Yes, I mean, without a doubt, right? And it's very interesting as well, because so for example, in the US in the 1950s, I mean, first of all, it was banned, right? Like the production code banned it. But second of all, when you coded it, right? So that part of the reason why it had to be coded is also because it was banned, right? But then when you coded it, there were all these ideas that went along with it, right? So, kind of homosexuals were seen to be a danger to the state. Why? Because they all lived secret lives, and they were like double agents. They could pass, right? But then
they subverted norms.
That's right. And then also because they were so promiscuous, right? Like kind of one time they were like sleeping with this garage mechanic, but the next time it was like the minister of state or something. Yeah, so kind of information got passed around in ways that nobody could control. Yeah, so they were seen as like, I forget what they were called, the fifth whatever. The fifth. It was a fifth column, right? It was like
the fifth
column. Yeah, which was like it was almost like an army against the state, but that was secret, right? So people were prosecuted for being gay under McCarthyism because it was seen as being anti-American and very likely to help the communists, right? Very ironically, of course, the people who ran all of this, was gay himself, Roy Cohn, right? Eastwood made a film about. Yeah, and also Edgar, the head of the CIA was reputed also to be gay. So actually, all of these things, were not without foundation.
There was a massive gay scandal in the UK, wasn't there, in political firmament? I'm sure. I forget.
Well, there were so many.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But anyway, the fact that it had to be secret, but that it existed, and that people could pass, right? That it was hidden, right? That was seen as kind of like not only presenting a real danger, right? Well, it was seen as presenting a real danger, but to the state. This is something that obviously, as a gay man, I noticed right away, and it upset me. It's not key or at the core of the film, so let's be careful. And
let me just clarify, the fifth column is any group of people who undermine a larger group from within, usually in favour of an enemy group or nation. The activities of a fifth column can be overt or clandestine. The origin is during the siege of Madrid in the Spanish Civil War. Nationalist General Emilio Mola told a journalist in 1936 that as his 4 columns of troops approached Madrid, a fifth column, or quinta columna, of supporters inside the city would support him and undermine the Republican government from within.
So just to imitate your brother, it's quinta columna.
Quinta columna. Or did I say quinta?
Yes, I don't know what you quinta columna or something.
No. We can't all be Euro.
No, my Chinese is as bad as your Spanish.
The term was then widely used in Spain, and then Hemingway used it as the title of his only play. There you go.
Anyway, so that clarifies what I was saying. Yeah? So gay people were seen as a kind of a fifth column, but for the Soviet Union.
So we've spoken a lot about a large flaw that we agree on in the film.
Yes.
But that doesn't say anything about the many, many things that we liked.
Yes, no, and to be fair, let's articulate. I think, this is a fantastic film, and really the only thing, in my view, that prevents it from being like truly great is what I just mentioned, and possibly a few more things that are connected to that. But it's a wonderfully paced thriller. It's wonderful to see, a film that is political, in my view, right? Like, it's a film about things that matter, and a kind of, about disseminating information, and disseminating kind of, reasons to act, right? And the film begins at the very beginning. It says something like, the normal disclaimer. If this film resembles
any resemblance to fictional persons or events is accidental, and this says is not accidental.
Exactly, right? So you're very much
which I should have assumed, I guess. I didn't.
Yes.
I thought it was a bit of a joke.
Yes.
Well, no, actually, no. I didn't realize it was talking specifically about, or based specifically on real life events. But I did assume that it meant it was talking about the kind of the state of the world as it was, and it was just trying to be overt about that. Like every film is commenting on the world as it is.
Yes.
But I thought it was just trying to be overt about that in a humorous way. But obviously, It's being a little more clear that it's really about something that really happened.
The other thing that I want to say is that I find it very relevant to our time.
That's why they're showing it at the Mac, isn't it?
It's kind of it's a film in which kind of basic fundamental kind of rights, basic fundamental tenets of democracy are actually kind of being overturned in the same way that like Trump seems to be overturning kind of everything that makes America America, right? So, and what's inspiring to me about this film, or not inspiring, but what moved me, is to see the chances that people took, right? So kind of the very simple act of listening to a talk against disarmament kind of involved people putting their bodies on the line, knowing that they were going to get beaten by the police and gassed, and, and they were still there, right? So kind of, you forget how much it cost to acquire the freedoms that we have, and how little it takes to take them all away. So I found that kind of moving.
The central sort of set piece of the opening act, which is the rally, the protest, the crossing the street, and ultimately the attack on the politician, reminded me a lot of Detroit. It had this kind of... Obviously, the film actually is similar to Detroit, except the difference is that Detroit is hugely about that event. In Detroit's case, it's about the people being lined up in the house and mistreated, to put it lightly, by the police. And then the investigation is quite brief at the end. It was also the investigation. This is half the film or more. But it reminds me of that, this enactment of a hugely tense situation involving police brutality and regular people and different groups of regular people all mingling together, and there being, in my case, no idea what was going to happen. Again, not familiar with the real events. There's a great deal of tension, and I felt kind of very similar to you, on the news you've seen events in the street that look exactly like this. It felt like it hit close to home. Every sort of student protest, or kind of people protesting on Wall Street, for instance, all looks just like this.
Yes.
It hasn't changed.
Yes, I mean, the film kind of makes it exciting to watch, because first of all, it moves at a very quick pace. It's very interesting. I think very archetypally a film of its period. If you'd only see 1 minute of the film, you'd know that it was a film from the late 60s, right? The way that it's cut, there's a lot of zooms, right? Kind of the type of color that it has, the way that it uses kind of flashbacks. So, it's almost like you get different points of view on important actions, and also you get kind of, things of memory. So, for example, when Irene Papas goes to her husband in the hospital, who they're not getting along with, almost every step in is like a flashback of memory when she was with him, when they were happy, or argument. It looks like, she's looking in one way, and then instead of going forward with the action, you go backwards to a memory, right? And so
briefly, it's cut in very quickly and comes back.
It's fast. So basically, kind of, what you get is a really kind of rounded the depiction of a relationship, and also the complications around it. The kind of, people have mixed feelings. So there was a very moving moment where she takes his cologne and sniffs it, as a way of bringing him back or recalling him, or
he's just passed away.
So she wants to keep something corporeal, or corporeal is the wrong word, because obviously scent is not quite corporeal, but something that manifests presence, really.
Yeah, well, the film makes a point of the last time she saw him, she and her husband are not together in the contemporary time of the film. The only time you see them together is through their memories, when wasn't that Yves Montand?
Yes.
When the Yves Montand character sees a girl in the window, and obviously she reminds him of his wife, and then some memories show up of the two of them together, and then the wife has memories of the two of them together as well. Those are the times you see them together. But when she shows up at the hospital, where he's being operated on for the third time, she's told she can't walk into her room, which she does walk into, and then she sees through the door the operating room, but she doesn't see anything in there. And this shot comes back a few times, where it's just something happening below the window, but you can't see. She doesn't get to see her husband. And then what she does see of him, ultimately, is about 15 x-rays of his skull. That's all that she really has of him. So that's the only time she gets to interact with him. So the cologne, sniffing that, is so important, because that's something different. It's not... It's something that meant something else, and has an emotional... kind of component. Whereas seeing the X-rays is so harsh, and I think the film really emphasises that she doesn't get to physically connect with him.
Yes, and it's made even more poignant because clearly they've been a couple who have had their difficulties, right? So the implication is that the Yves Montand character has been having an affair with someone else, right? So their marriage is kind of on rocky ground, right? So. And that's what's lovely about the film, that you get kind of these complex things, so on the one hand it's kind of a marriage with problems, on the other hand there's kind of real feeling and regret, and you get that from both characters, from the Yves Montand character as well, who talks about his children and says, I haven't been able to see them very much, and yet he carries the picture of his wife and child with him everywhere. Yet on the other hand, he sees a a shop assistant, and it reminds him not only of his wife, but of an affair that he seemed to be having. Kind of the flashback is to a young woman he's with, as well as his wife, and his wife looking at Jaakko having caught them. There's this implication.
That's right. The first thing I liked about the film, the first thing I liked about the film, as I said, was that it was in colour. But the first thing after that I liked about the film was it opens up on people talking about wine.
Yes.
And I thought, this is a film set in France. The film opens up with the police basically having a meeting, and they're talking about cutting out the mildew.
Yes.
So you must protect your wine from mildew with these 3 stages, and obviously they'll care very deeply about protecting their wine. And then it's a metaphor for cutting out liberalism and left-winginess and communism.
Yes, exactly. Though, now that you mention it, one of the interesting things about the film is that initially its location, if you haven't participated in the whole publicity drive for the film, which we did not, I found it kind of confusing because, it could have been set in France, right? Mm. And for a lot of the time I thought, is this Marseille? Yeah, because the people are too dark and right, okay. So, it's clearly meant to be set in Greece, right? Mm. But actually, it took me a while to be sure of it. Though, I should have known better because I actually had read quite a bit about the film over the years. But,
I think the film retains some ambiguity about it because, well, the fact is, obviously, everyone is speaking in French and they are French actors. Yeah. So if it's set in Greece, it's like having English people playing Greek but just speaking English. Well, like the death of Stalin, everyone's Russian, but they're English people and Americans speaking English. But I think the film maintains some ambiguity though, because it never says where it's set, and people just talk about the capital is somewhere else, but they don't say Athens or Paris.
Yes.
And so there is a kind of general sort of European feel in some respects. Some of the architecture is quite general.
And on the other hand, the cafes are serving Greek pastries, and so on. Yeah, so it's you eventually get that it's not France, but actually I don't remember it ever being really said that it's Athens, right? And the signs and so on are often in French rather than in Greek, right? Yeah. So
I must say that I didn't question for a moment that it was set in France. In other words, I assumed it from the beginning, and then nothing deterred me from thinking that. And I suppose I then thought about the student uprisings in Paris and how I assume the film was sort of more based on those, really.
No, because if you see you wouldn't have colonels like that involved in a French. I'm not sure, but I think even things like the police uniforms and and so on and so forth, right? It's all. I think it's clearly meant to be set in Greece. Though the interesting thing is that it to my, from what I can gather from just having watched the film, it never explicitly states it, which is in itself interesting. Yeah. I'm sure there must be a reason.
Well, I think it's trying to make the story more general. I think if it says this is a film about Greece, it's easier to say, well, this is just how things happen in Greece.
Well,
this is why you're saying it feels so relevant today.
Yes. What's interesting as well is that if one looks historically, right, all these attempts at freedom or at democracy, like in Europe, they already had a history. So, for example, there was the 1956 Hungarian uprising, right? There was the one in Czechoslovakia in 1968. Then you have the student thing in Paris in 1968. So actually, I think your point about maybe wanting to make it more general, might be true. This is something that could happen to anyone, really.
And was happening.
And was happening, So, but actually, what the film argues is that it is happening not only in Soviet places, but actually, in
the place, if it really is meant to be Greece and we kind of miss things, it's the place where democracy was invented.
Yes, and it's clearly Greece because they talk about the palace and it was a monarchy at the time.
France has palaces.
They didn't have a monarchy. And so kind of one of the groups is a royalist group, the right-wing group, that's behind the incident is a royalist group. It's very specifically a royalist group. So for a while I thought, oh my God, kind of, the sentiment for the monarchy, for the Bourbons, has lasted a long time in France, and then you realize, no, it's clearly, the king was still there, I think, at this time. So
I'm happy to consider it as wanting to be a general sort of any town.
Yes.
I think that is ultimately what the film is going for. I think it would be more explicit if it were setting itself in a certain location.
Yes. Anyway,
won for best film editing at the Academy Awards as well,
and I think that's well deserved.
You can tell.
Yes.
It has lots of editing.
Yes.
Right from the beginning, it's so fast. Actually, at the beginning, it was kind of annoying me. The opening is just a meeting, or kind of lectures and PowerPoint presentations basically being given to the chiefs of police, and the camera's cutting so quickly. It's actually a little bit hard to adjust to, as well, because on top of that, I'm also basically looking at the bottom third of the screen where the subtitles are. So yes. I'm trying to take in all these images that they're being thrown at me with all this dialogue that's being just given to me in the bottom half of the screen.
Yes.
So there's a lot to contend with right at the beginning.
Yes.
But it's edited very quickly and very naturally. Like nothing really seems out of place. And when those flashbacks come in, they're so beautifully integrated and moved to, and they're timed. They're timed really nicely. Like they're so fast and fleeting, and they really feel like these kind of harsh flashes of memory.
Yeah.
Particularly when the woman's husband has died, and she's kind of being slightly tortured, like she's in shock basically.
Yes.
And then these flashes of memory coming back to her, and they're so brief and sharp.
It's an intricate, complex thriller with lots of characters, and the characters seem to grow as the film proceeds, that nonetheless feels absolutely contemporary. It moves at an incredibly fast pace. You understand kind of what's going on. You're kind of not only geographically situated, but narratively situated in all of the components. And basically the components then refer back to each other kind of throughout the narrative, right? So there are a few lines of dialogue that are key because, they kind of connect people in the police with the thugs and so on. Yeah, and kind of they're repeated, and you're made aware that there's a connection, and then kind of, everything unfolds, in a really neat way because all the dots kind of match up, right?
I think that's a really insightful point, because I think what we tend to think of when we think of editing, as I just did, is how one shot relates to another in in the micro level, how sequences work, which is part of it. But the other part of editing is how an entire story is constructed. And I think this film has a lot of characters and a lot of different kind of sections of characters, and they're all kind of maintained and given their time. No one feels left out or underexplained, and they're juggled really nicely, and information is so important in the film. Like every time the inspector, every time the judge learns a new piece of information, it's important. It recontextualizes everything that's come before, and he then he learns that the chief of police gave someone an instruction, and then he speaks to the chief of police. And the chief of police denies it or says something else, but he hasn't directly accused him, but he's using that information to then coax something else out of him, and it's very easy to understand and follow. But you know exactly what he's thinking all the time.
Yes.
It's very economical as well. I mean, there's so much to pack in.
Yes.
It's incredibly efficient with the way it dispenses information to you, and helps you understand what people are thinking, what the information means to them.
Yes. So it's coherent in that way. I think it moves very quickly. It moves like a contemporary film. And I don't know what you felt, but I also found it exciting. And actually it makes me think, because it has action scenes and it has chase scenes, and in a way it's really interesting because, the action scenes in a way, like, you have a few blows and they have terrible repercussions. They result in death, right? But they're made A, exciting to watch, right, and B, having consequences. Yeah. So these scenes continue to be exciting, even though in a contemporary film you'd have 5 cars zipping through a highway and, at incredible speeds and whatever. Was actually, this is an old tub with the muffler that doesn't work, right? Yeah. But it still feels exciting. It's,
I agree. It felt very exciting the whole way through. The film changed into something I didn't expect, which was that it became a procedural, became an investigation. And again, that remained exciting because then, as I said, the film's controlled information is such that it has a great sense of pacing and tension. Are these guys going to get found out? I like the way the film shows you the events as they happen and then shows you two people giving their versions of them. Yes. And actually one of them is from the baddies and one of them is from the goodies.
Yes.
Roughly speaking, one of them is the chief of police, who is the ultimate baddie. Yes. And the other one is one of the left-wing guys who was a friend and colleague of the senator who died.
Yes.
They both give their events and they're both not entirely accurate. One is slightly more accurate than the other, but they have their differences, and you know that. And then it comes down to, is the inspector going to figure it out?
Yeah. That happens at a key moment in the film, and it's part of the beauty of the way that the film is structured. It's part of the beauty of the screenplay. Because for the whole first third, it really is about Yves Montand giving the stock, really, and what happens, right? Then the film shifts gears, and in between the film kind of being moved on from Yves Montand as the protagonist to Jean-Louis Trintignant as the judge, trying to uncover what really happened, you have these two different versions, of what happened, right? Kind of being told by two different people. So it could have been this, it could have been that. And that happens really at that moment of the shift.
Yeah.
So kind of, it's a really beautiful structure that the film has.
Yeah. It's 2 hours and 10 minutes long and doesn't have a lull.
Yes.
At all.
Yes.
That's pretty incredible, actually.
Yes. It was thrilling to watch, I thought. And it was kind of thrilling to watch as a thriller, and actually I thought it was also a kind of a model of what political cinema can be. I'm sure there's lots, that's been written on this.
I'm so glad that I saw it on a cinema screen.
Yes.
And I'll tell you for why. It's because I had a really bad time watching The Day of the Jackal. I found it really boring. In fact, I wasn't really watching it, to be honest, and I kind of skipped ahead, and it deserves another chance for me, basically, because I know that it's a classic, and I know there are things about it that I'd like, but it's because I was watching it on a laptop screen while I was doing other stuff. Like, that is not the way to watch a movie, and I'm sure that even if I'd been giving this film my full attention on my TV at home, it wouldn't have been the same watching this.
Yes.
Being in a cinema and having it big and in front of you, and you're devoted to it, and your phone's off. Well, mine was.
Pointed comment.
You know what I mean? It makes a huge difference.
Yes.
And it's the way to see it. Like, you say you bought it on DVD and you'd been meaning to see it for ages. Aren't you glad that you didn't watch it until now?
I am. And I would recommend it to everyone.
If other people are sharing it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so see it if you can.
Yes, see it if you can. And even if you can't see it on a big old screen,
get the DVD.
See it on a small one, because it's a really good film.
Yes. All right.
I told my mates I was going to be late. I told my mates I might be late for the football because I was seeing it and I had to rush off. As it happened, I got there with about 10 minutes to spare, so it was all right. But and they were saying, "Oh, what are you seeing?" And I said, "Oh, it's this film called Z." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "It's this French-Algerian political thriller from 1969. And they went, "Oh yeah, you're welcome to it."
Well,
but more for them, it's brilliant.
In 1969, they would have seen it.
Yes. In fact, I did look it up. I believe it was the 12th highest grossing film of 1969 in the US.
Can you believe it? A foreign subtitled film being the 12th highest box office success in the US. That would never happen now.
It made $14 million. The top film made $102 million. But the second top film made $44 million.
Yeah.
I'll give you the top 11 in reverse order. 11 was Winning. Then On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
That's amazing. So just a couple of ranks after a Bond.
Yeah. Mind you, the difference in box offices is 14 million to 22 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then Goodbye Columbus, Cactus Flower, True Grit, Paint Your Wagon, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, Hello Dolly, Number 3 is Easy Rider. Number 2 is Midnight Cowboy. And number 1 is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
So there you go. That's quite...
Just below the Westerns.
Yeah. But it's amazing to find a foreign film in that list, amongst that list.
Yeah. It outdid The Wild Bunch, Where Eagles Dare, Topaz, Once Upon a Time in the West. What a film.
Yes.
Wish they showed that at the Mac. They shoot horses, don't they? And The Stewardesses.
Oh, I've never heard of that one.
The Stewardesses. It's the most profitable 3D film. It's one of the most profitable films ever in terms of the ratio of box office to budget.
Yes.
Incredibly low budget, and then it made about $13 million.
I don't know if it's Once Upon a Time in the West, but one of the interesting things about this film is that it does have all of these references to pop cultures. For example, there's a newsagent where, one half of the screen is all pictures of Elvis Presley and the other is nudie pics, right? Mm. And then there's the scene where there begins to be a confrontation in the place that they had originally rented at the beginning of the film to host the talk, and they get into a kerfuffle, and one of the things that is knocked over is an image of Clint Eastwood in one of the Sergio Leone films. Right? Yes. So it's kind of interesting that the other one is kind of, on the list of films seen that year.
Yeah. Just to clarify, The Stewardesses is softcore porn.
Yes, I think I got that.
3D softcore porn.
Right.
That's why I did dissertation on 3D, you see. I needed the excuse to watch it.
Right. Oh, so that's how you know about it.
I think everyone should know about it.
Right.
It's a classic.
All right, so shall we wrap it up here?
Yeah. I'm really, really glad I saw that.
Okay, excellent.